has stepped into the role as regional leader just recently. And for Chester County Lyme, I want to welcome Ann Fulmer. She has also just recently stepped into the role. And these are individuals that feel a responsibility in their area, their county, to try to be a beacon of good, solid information for those with Lyme. We do a lot of different things in supporting the effort to get information out. We have a referral network, so we have a Lyme literate healthcare practitioner referral system. If you go to referral at palyme.org, you can let us know where you live, your town, your county, what you're looking for, and we can refer Lyme literate healthcare practitioners. You can also go onto our website and do the request that way. Year to date, we have generated 695 referrals in the month of July and the month of August. Each month, about an average of 95 referrals. And these are people that are suspicious. Maybe they have Lyme. They're individuals that have had chronic Lyme, but have been misdiagnosed or undertreated, and they're just really looking for some more evidence-based approaches to treatment. So that program is an informal referral program. We do not make our doctor list public, but you can go to the website and that email address, and we can introduce you to 3 or 4 Lyme literate practitioners in your general area. I will say as a caveat, it is really quite challenging because we have a lot of, and when I say a lot, it's a handful of Lyme practitioners in southeastern PA, in south central PA. We have more in southwestern PA, but when you start getting up to northwestern PA and north central, there's not a whole lot of Lyme practitioners with a lot of experience. So we're always looking. If you are working with a Lyme doctor or a Lyme practitioner, could be a naturopath, it could be a certified registered nurse practitioner. We're interested in who you're working with, so maybe we can add them to the list. We did an interview this morning with a new practitioner who's going to be welcome to the list shortly. One of the roles that we fill is trying to get education out. We're going to be speaking in October at the Pennsylvania Academy of Family Physicians in the Drexel Hills area of Pennsylvania. And we're also going to be speaking at a certified registered nurse practitioner conference in spring of next year. If you were on early, you probably heard us talking back and forth. We will be partnering with ILAS to hold what I believe will be the 5th, perhaps even the 6th, co-sponsored medical conference in Pennsylvania for Pennsylvania practitioners. This will be with ILADS, and it'll be with the Drexel University College of Medicine. It's going to be slated for May or June of next year. It's really important if you're working with your family doctor, or how many times you've been misdiagnosed by how many doctors, inviting them to attend a 2-day, 3-day conference that really gets into the fundamentals of Lyme and co-infections. So we really look to our grassroots efforts to reach out to your medical practitioner to invite them to attend these conferences. Just by way of housekeeping, the way that we will run this particular webinar is, please hold your questions to the end. I would like to do an introduction to Fred Diamond. For those of you that are on Zoom, there's a chat question function at the bottom that you can ask your questions. Bill Moore is a board member of PA Lyme, and he runs the Pittsburgh Lyme Support Group. He will gather everybody's questions, organize them, prioritize them, and then ask those questions to Fred at the end of his presentation. If you're watching on Facebook Live, ask your questions as you normally would by just posting. and Bill will capture those as well and ask those at the end. It really is my pleasure to introduce Fred Diamond. I had the pleasure of meeting him in April of this year at our patient conference at the Hershey Lodge. He reached out to us and said, I'm the author of a book. I would like to come, and I would be willing to donate the proceeds of any book sales to your organization, which we readily accepted. I run the Harrisburg Lyme Support Group. Fred was very generous by giving us about a half a dozen books, which we shared with those members of the Harrisburg Lyme. I have since talked to a lot of those individuals that we gave books to. I was really pleasantly surprised by the universal kind of buy-in to those individuals that said, this was a great book. I want my parents to read it, my spouse to read it, my pastor to read it. I want folks to really understand what it's like going through Lyme. And it was a very well-received book. So Fred Diamond is a co-founder of the Institute of Excellence in Sales. He helps employers with large sales organizations attract, retain, and develop top-tier sales excellence. He's also the author of a very popular book, Love, Hope, Lyme, What Family Members, Partners, and Friends Who Love a Chronic Lyme Survivor Need to Know. He's also the host of Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. So Fred's life changed when he decided to learn more about Lyme disease that afflicted somebody that he loved. He read every book that he could get his hands on. He joined Facebook groups. He attended webinars and podcasts. He quickly realized that he knew very little about Lyme disease and what survivors actually go through on a daily basis. Tonight's presentation is based on what he learned after writing Love, Hope, and Lyme and running his podcast. It's really a compendium of tips and sound advice directed to patients, family members, and friends who love someone with Lyme disease. So with that introduction, and one last word I'd like to mention, Fred, before turning it over to you. For those of you that are on a budget, the PDF of Fred's book is free to anyone that's a chronic Lyme survivor. All you have to do is contact Fred via Facebook Messenger or on LinkedIn. He will give more details at the end, but this really isn't a money-making proposition for Fred. It's really getting the information out there to help those that are afflicted with Lyme disease. So Fred, we're very appreciative that you're here. With that, allow me to turn it over to you.
Eric, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Eric and Bill and everybody who's here. Eric, I'm going to go, Bill, I'm going to go share my screen. All right. And now I'm going to go into slideshow mode, right?
Yep.
All right. Is it there?
Looks good.
All right. So yeah, my name is Fred Diamond. I'm the author of Love, Hope, Lyme, What Family Members, Partners, and Friends Who Love a Chronic Lyme Survivor Need to Know. And we launched our Love, Hope, Lyme podcast to support the messages in the book about a year ago. We actually are getting ready to publish episode number 38. You can find the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast on YouTube and also on Apple Podcasts. And we've actually had over 100,000 downloads and listens and interactions with the show. And I'm very excited about that. It's kind of surreal being here 3 years ago. If you would have asked me, would I be doing a webinar to the Pennsylvania Lyme Resource Network? I didn't even know that the Pennsylvania Lyme Resource Network even existed. So the answer would have been absolutely not. Some affiliation. I'm from Philadelphia originally. So I feel very tuned to everything Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. Right now I'm in Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. And like Eric had mentioned, you can find me on Facebook and you could find me on LinkedIn. As a matter of fact, I made 2 Lyme connections this morning or today on LinkedIn. So reach out to me. I get about 15 to 20 people reach out to me every day, asking me questions, asking for resource, etc. The Dalai Lama said, I love everything in this world except for ticks. And that is definitely true. So to give you a little bit of a background, in the spring of 2021, someone who was very close to me at the time said they wanted to focus on their recovery from Lyme, and they wanted to and felt that they needed to do it independently. So the late spring, summer of 2021, I bought every book I could find on Lyme disease, went to Amazon, bought every book, read every book from page to page. You know, when somebody reads like a mystery book and they talk about it being a page turner, as I'm reading Dr. Richard Horowitz, How Can I Get Better? For me, it was a page turner as I was learning things and things became more apparent to me and things became more obvious to me. I went on to Facebook and typed in Lyme, and I was shocked to find 1,000 groups, some with tens of thousands of participants, some local, you know, in a region. I was just shocked to see what people were talking about. Anybody who ever uttered the word Lyme, I called and had probably a dozen conversations with friends and wives of friends, and just was stunned to hear the depth. You know, prior to all of this, my mantra was to keep a particular person out of stress and to know where the best gluten-free pizza was. So I knew where the best gluten-free pizza was in every town across the United States. And I also Googled Lyme Warrior, and I was shocked to find 27,000 people who consider themselves to be Lyme Warrior. I also uh, discovered the Pennsylvania Lyme Resource Network. Y'all were doing a webinar, I think it was August of 2021, and Dr. Richard Horowitz was the guest. I believe Eric was the host, and I was shocked to find that I knew 90% of what he was talking about. Now, again, I had just read both of his books and had spent the whole summer and spring just really diving deep into understanding what there was to know about the disease. I took all this learning and I discovered LymeDisease.org, which again, I had no idea even existed. As a matter of fact, I've always been very active in charities. I was on a couple boards of some local and some national charities. I did not know that there were charities and advocacy organizations associated with tick-borne illness and tick-borne disease. I always say tick-borne disease, not illness, or Lyme disease. And I reached out to LymeDisease.org and I said, you know, I've been searching your site. I haven't found any articles. And the word caregiver was a word that I had never, it never even occurred to me that I might be a caregiver of somebody. I just knew that I was paying a lot of attention to someone who I loved. The editor, or I should say the president of LymeDisease.org, her name is Dorothy Lewin. I approached her and I said, you know, can I write an article for LymeDisease.org on how to be supportive when your partner has Lyme? And she said, no one has ever in the history of LymeDisease.org approached us about that. Why don't you send it over? I'll take a look at it. I drafted the publication. I sent it over. It got like 500 likes. People started reaching out to me on Facebook. I told Dorothy, I said, you know, run it however many times you want. She ran it about 4 times over the next 4 months. And people just reached out and said, my spouse doesn't care. My family doesn't care. People in my life, they don't care. My friends don't call me anymore. They think I'm faking. They don't think this disease even exists. And I was like, this was mind blowing to me because this just had never occurred to me that all of these things about this disease were apparent to people. It wasn't even a thought to believe that this wasn't a real disease and that people were struggling with this. So I published that. Eventually, I became good friends with Dorothy. I published a couple of other articles in LymeDisease.org. And eventually people said, you know, why don't you take what you learned and turn it into a book? So in the summer of 2022, I published a book called Love, Hope, Lyme: What Family Members, Partners, and Friends Who Love a Chronic Lyme Survivor Need to Know. As Eric mentioned, the PDF of the book has been free from day one. I've given out close to 1,500 PDFs of the book. People just need to reach out to me on Facebook or LinkedIn. Excuse me. I have a limited presence on Instagram. Some people reach out to me there, and I'd be happy to send them a copy of the book. and it's also available on Amazon. A number of people have reached out and asked for a dozen copies to give as Christmas gifts for their family members or holiday gifts. And I was happy to sign those as well. But one of the reasons why I wrote the book was I realized that I knew 5%. And I'm going to be talking about things over the next 15, 20 minutes or so that I did not know existed. I knew somebody who had Lyme disease. I knew it was a tick-borne disease. That was pretty much the extent. I knew that there were various symptoms, but I didn't know all the details, which we'll go into in depth here, which is just mind-blowing. I also started talking to people, and people with chronic Lyme said to me on various occasions that they believe that 75% of committed relationships will terminate. And usually it's the spouse, the person or the partner who doesn't have Lyme is the one who would generate or begin the termination process. You're not who you were. You're always in bed. You can't work anymore. We don't go dancing anymore. And I was shocked to find that that was a stat that people were throwing around. And I also learned about the emotional toll. I must have spoken to 500 people right before in the year that I had written the book. And the stories that I had heard were time and time again. If you're actually listening to me right now and you're one of the people with chronic Lyme disease, I'm sure that you know exactly what I'm talking about. The book has been very successful. We're up to 96 reviews on Amazon. So if you have a copy of the book and you haven't given me an Amazon review, let's get to 100. But seriously, people have reached out to me all over the world. The very first day that the book was published, the Lyme Disease Association of Australia, the Lyme Disease Association of Australia published a review of the book, which was very, very kind of them. And it led to me to understand that it's not just a mid-Atlantic disease. It's not just a Northeast disease. And we all know that. It's around the world, Australia, Europe. On my podcast, I've interviewed a doctor in Poland. I've interviewed people all over the United States, including Canada. And it's a global disease. It's not just something that's restricted to a certain area. And people were telling me that by reading the book, it helped them get their family back. And a lot of these people I became Facebook friends with, some LinkedIn connections, and whatever I can do to help get the message out. It's very rewarding when you hear that that people were able to get their families back and relationships rekindled. I've gone all over the country signing books. I'm a marketer by trade. I run a company. It's called the Institute for Excellence in Sales. My customers are VPs of sales at organizations with large salespeople. So if you're out there and you ever want to write a book, the moment you publish a book is the moment you start marketing a book. So I've gone on podcasts. I've traveled, Eric mentioned, to Pennsylvania, and I've signed books all over the place. I've had people order them all over the place and very kindly take pictures of them reading the book. So that's something I'm very, very happy about. All right, so here's what I learned. And like I mentioned, prior to this, I knew somebody with Lyme, and I saw the way that it affected this particular person at times, but I didn't know tons of things. I didn't know the breadth of symptoms that can come with Lyme disease, memory loss, anxiety. People say to me, do you have anxiety and then Lyme kind of accelerated it? Or did the Lyme disease and the inability to heal and cure and treat lead to anxiety? Multiple symptoms. Those people listening here who have chronic Lyme or have someone in your life, that there are multiple things. It's not just like you broke an ankle and your ankle's bothering you and you have to get a cast, etc. There's multiple things all through the spectrum. They call Lyme the great pretender because it represents so many different things that aren't that, but they're symptoms of the root cause, which is Lyme. I didn't know that there were co-infections. The average tick can generate up to, some people say, as many as 24 similar diseases, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So it's not just the treating for the Lyme. I've had some doctors who said to me, if the tick only transmitted Lyme, we could pretty much figure that out. But then you couple it with up to 24 different co-infections, it makes it difficult. The Lyme bacteria and the parasites from the various co-infections go all over the body, wherever there's soft tissue, heart inflammation, Lyme carditis can happen. and everybody can agree there's lots of pain. So some of the tick-borne co-infections, like I mentioned, there's as many as 24, maybe more co-infections that are transmitted by a tick, and they all come with their own set of symptoms and complications and treatment. Two most common ones are babesiosis and Bartonella. And usually almost everyone, like the Lyme doctor had told me recently that every patient that they've treated who has Lyme disease also has babesiosis and Bartonella. And again, they also have their own symptoms. Some of the various co-infections can have as many as 2 to 3 dozen symptoms on their own, and they all require their own treatment. There's a lot of debate. What do you treat first? Do you treat the Bartonella first? Do you treat the Lyme disease first? Do you treat the neuro side first? It makes it very, very complicated. And I'm sure, again, if you're watching this and you're a chronic Lyme survivor, you're nodding your head. There's a new tick-borne disease out there. Oh, I'm going to say new, but one that's gaining some prevalence. People even say it's inflicting more people than the deer tick that communicates Lyme disease, alpha-gal syndrome, red meat allergies. So, it's caused by the Lone Star tick. It's called the Lone Star tick because it has a little dot on its back. And this is a set of symptoms. When you eat red meat, within a couple hours, you get horrible symptoms, vomiting, fever, etc. And that's out there as well. So, it's interesting. We use the analogy of a broken ankle. If you break an ankle anywhere on the planet, Sydney, Australia, Singapore, Shanghai, Sacramento, California, every orthopedic surgeon is going to take some x-rays. They're going to put you in a cast, and they're going to tell you to sit down for 6 weeks and binge watch Lost or whatever it is that you want to watch. Almost every single orthopedic surgeon on the planet is going to give you the same thing to do. Maybe you require surgery, maybe not, but the treatment's going to be X, and then the recovery is going to be Y. So you know what to expect. You know that I'm going to get the x-rays, I'm going to get the casts, it's going to be set, it's going to take 6 weeks, and it's going to be 2 weeks of rehab, if you will. The Lyme effects are unpredictable, and they require adjustments to what you're doing, especially if the Lyme is chronic and isn't diagnosed. Just to have a little definition, people agree there's basically 2 stages of Lyme. There's what's called acute, where you get bit, and hopefully you'll see a bullseye rash, which will be a pretty clear indication of Lyme disease. If you see that quickly and you go to a medical provider who understands that that's the bullseye rash, that's a good sign you have Lyme. If you take antibiotics for a couple of weeks, should be in good shape. A lot of people have symptoms for years. I interviewed or spoke to someone today who had Lyme symptoms for 20 years. And finally, in the 20th year, she was diagnosed by a doctor who believed that she had Lyme. They did the testing, and the testing is a whole separate webinar. I'm sure you guys have covered this before. The testing for Lyme is atrocious. There's a lot of work being done for diagnostics, but it might take you 5, 10, 15 years. And maybe after seeing 15, 20 doctors, I've heard people who've had 24 to 30 doctors before they finally were truly diagnosed with Lyme. Unfortunately, along the way, they'll get diagnosed with maybe mental problems. Gee, we've tested everything, but we can't see that there's Lyme. So maybe it's in your head, right? And then imagine if your family hears that, your husband, your brother, your father, your best friend. Well, the doctor just said it might be in your head. They've tested for everything. And I can't see you, but I'm sure if there's people watching this and you've been through that journey, you're nodding your head. If you have someone in your life with Lyme, you need to be actively listening and being present. When I started publishing the book in the summer of 2022, one of my clients, a guy who's a VP of sales at a well-known company, saw me post about it. He said that his sister-in-law's daughter has Lyme disease and nobody understands it. He said he bought a dozen copies, or they bought a dozen copies for everybody to read. And then he said the one thing that changed is they all became more empathetic to what she was going through. So if you have someone in your life, I use a line in the book where I say they don't want to be treated like puppy dogs. Most of them don't want to be, treated that way, but they want you to believe them, and they want you to be there, and they want you to be there as they're going through this and understand what they're going through. One of the other complications of Lyme is that there's so many other things that play into this. Show of hands, which I can't see, who have had mold problems, right? Pure mold in a house. There you go, Bill. I'm sure there's a dozen other people who've raising their hand as well. If you live in a house with mold, God forbid you live in Florida, where I think every house has mold or something like that, it worsens the Lyme symptoms, because basically when you have the Lyme, you're trying to spend all of your time detoxifying from the bacteria that's in your body. You're trying to kill it, which is a whole separate thing that we'll talk about. But there are things, unfortunately, that get in the way of killing off the bacteria, and mold is one of them. So again, there's a lot of debate. Do you treat the mold first, or do you treat the Lyme and then the mold? It's very difficult to do both, but it adds a whole bunch of different complications as well. I'm up to 37 episodes of my Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. I think 3 episodes ago, I interviewed Dr. Neil Nathan, who was one of the country's world renowned experts on mold. And I said to him, I said, is this like unique mold? Is it something unique? He said, no, it's textbook mold. Mold that has built in your house, mold that has built in your basement. Maybe there's a leaky basement, or a, like a moist, type of a basement, if you will. That's mold. And unfortunately, it's very, very difficult to treat. Another one, heavy metal toxicity, lead, mercury, eating fish, right? Eating tuna with mercury, et cetera. That does a similar thing. It causes the inability to break down the bacteria that you have in your body, Lyme again being a bacteria. So some of the detox you need to do is clearing the heavy metals from your body. People who have had what's it called, like fillings in their mouth for cavities when they were a child, sometimes that metal will inhibit the breaking down of the bacteria and the toxicity. One of the therapies that I had learned about was chelation. Chelation therapy to remove the toxins. So that's just another variable that's thrown in. Again, using the broken ankle theory, there's very few things besides the fixing of the ankle, putting into a cast. With Lyme, there are so many complications that I didn't even know about. So half your time is being spent detoxing, getting rid of the bacteria in your body. There's something called Herxheimer effect. And again, all the chronic Lyme survivors here are shaking their head. Basically, what happens is when you kill the bacteria in your body, the bacteria, needs to go somewhere. So you have all these dead bacteria, so to speak, in your body, and the body is trying to flush it out. When it feels really bad and you have more pain than maybe it was caused by the Lyme, that's called the Herxheimer effect. You can Google it and find out the origin of the doctor who, I think it was a Danish doctor who gave it the name. Some people say that the Herxheimer effect is worse than the Lyme. When I was doing the research for the book, one of the doctors said, if you're herxing, the term is herxing, much more painful than what the Lyme was doing for you. You're treating yourself too abruptly, not abruptly, but too aggressively. So anyway, that's another angle that's thrown in there, having to get rid of the bacteria that you just killed. And then this effect, which causes pain. As a matter of fact, when I published my book in July of 2022, someone who bought the book and read it wrote me a note, or I think it was via Facebook or whatever, and said, you should write your next book just on the Herxheimer effect. So I think I devoted 2 paragraphs to it in the book. I don't know if there's a whole book out there or not, but it's something that everybody with chronic Lyme deals with. And again, I know that Pennsylvania Lyme Resource Network was advertising this show to people with this webinar, to people who are supporting chronic Lyme survivors. When I first wrote my book, I thought that my audience was going to be people like me, family members, partners, friends, maybe doctors who wanted to know more about what their loved ones were going through. So I hope there's a lot of you watching this today, either as we're doing it live or sometime in the future. What I've come to find is about 90% of the people who bought the book, who support the podcast, who comment on it, are people with chronic Lyme who are looking for more support, who are trying to get more support from their family members. So I didn't understand how Lyme was treated. Before I started this whole process, I was ignorant with a lot of people. I had someone and I said, go figure out what you need to do and we'll figure out how to make it happen. Those of us who don't have a disease like Lyme disease or some type of chronic illness that has taken over our life, we just think, go to the doctor. The doctor's going to give you a prescription and you'll be fine, right? Or they'll put you in a cast, or they'll tell you to sleep it off for a couple of days. I had no idea about the complication that happened with Lyme. And there's basically three different schools I've learned that there are for treating Lyme. First is antibiotics. Doxycycline is the most common one. If you have a child with Lyme disease, amoxicillin, is the key one, if you will. And sometimes they'll put you on a 3-week regimen. And if you have Lyme right away and you catch it with that bullseye rash we were talking about, it should, in most cases, help you. There's a term that the CDC says is called post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, which is where you have symptoms after you're treated. Well, the antibiotics aren't really going to help you a whole lot if you've had the Lyme for 10, 15, 20 years and you finally discovered it. The second type of treatment is herbals. Dr. Buhner, may he rest in peace, was one of the first, I think it was a botanist who discovered various herbs like cat's claw and Japanese knotwood that can help in various aspects of treating the Lyme disease. And they're called supplements in a lot of ways. A lot of people take a balance. Some doctors will prescribe, even years into your Lyme journey, you need to go on what's called a PICC line, where antibiotics are entered into your system. And the third thing that I discovered during the research of the book is that there are some people who will travel around the world to get some type of, let's just say, unusual treatment. I made a good friend who is a Lyme survivor who went to Peru to take various hallucinogens, if you will, and alternative types of medicines to cure themselves. And that's what people will do. I found people who've done some extreme things that I don't talk about in the book, and some extreme things that are available that I don't cover because they're way out there. But the challenge too is that each protocol is personalized. What might work for you might not work for another person. A lot of times Lyme people will tell me, the family members and friends who are trying to be supportive will say, well, I know somebody who took 3 weeks of doxycycline and that should take care of it. Well, if you're 10 years into your Lyme journey, that ain't going to take care of it. There's going to be more that's necessary. So every person needs to develop their own personal treatment plan. And unfortunately, some of these treatment plans, as you know, might take months to even begin to kick in. Bill, how are we doing today? All right. We doing good so far? All right. So there's a couple different challenges with Lyme as well. If the bacteria gets across the brain, the blood-brain barrier, it can cause some significant neurologic challenges. Brain fog is the most common one that a lot of people with Lyme will deal with. Memory loss, short and term memory loss, personality change. There's a well-known doctor in the Lyme world, Dr. Bransfield, who's published great work to show why Lyme disease will cause personality change, short and term memory loss. When the bacteria crosses that blood-brain barrier and gets into the brain, again, the form of the Lyme bacteria is what they call, I always get it wrong, spirochete or spirochete. It's the same shape as the bacteria of syphilis. And it digs into your body, which is why it digs into your soft tissue and your joints. And it may represent itself as arthritis. A lot of times, one of the very first diagnostics or the first diagnoses that a doctor will say is, if they're not Lyme literate, is, gee, it looks like you have arthritis because you're having trouble with your joints. Well, it isn't arthritis. It's the bacteria, the spirochete, digging into your soft tissue. It gets into your brain. It can dig itself into your brain and be there for years. I just want to let people know also, I should have said this at the beginning, I'm not a doctor. Okay. I like to say I'm a history major with an MBA. So today's podcast should not be treated as medical advice. So I need to make that disclaimer. Probably should have made it in the beginning, but this is all based on the research that I've done. I had 10 medical practitioners review the book. I had a couple of attorneys review the book as well, just to make sure that everything we published was correct. And I was very excited when we published the book that I got no comments back from people saying, you're totally wrong on this. The only mistake I made in the book is at the very end, I said, just because your loved one was bitten by an insect, is no reason to discard them and to disavow them, if you will. I had someone reach out to me and let me know that the tick is actually an arachnid. It's actually technically not an insect. So I was proud that was the only mistake that I made. But neurological Lyme, I mean, this may take years for people to get through. I interviewed somebody on my podcast who said to me she was angry nonstop. Some people use the term Lyme rage. She said she was angry. Her children were between the ages of 2 and 6. She was angry the entire time. They were ages 2 to 6 because she couldn't do mother things. She was in bed 90% of the time. She couldn't take them to the park. She couldn't do things. She was nonstop angry, and she couldn't control the anger as well. What Lyme can do to you neurologically is it's disgraceful. Little things, moon flares. You see a lot of people in the various groups say that when the full moon occurs, the symptoms arise. And it's not really the moon. What it is a lot of the bacteria have 28-day cycles. So they'll regenerate in 28 days, similar to the moon's processes, if you will. But a lot of people will notice that they'll get various flares, new symptoms. A lot of neurological things will be happening on full moon. So it's not necessarily the moon per se. It's basically that it reflects the cycle that the bacteria goes through. This is a ridiculous disease. I'm going to be honest with you. I tell people this is not a disease. It's a disease that no human should have to endure. And imagine all the things that we talked about. You know, if you were to type Lyme disease, chronic Lyme disease into the internet, into a search engine, there's a good chance that you're going to see articles that say chronic Lyme disease doesn't exist. Imagine if your loved one, if your daughter, if your spouse, if your sister-in-law is having all of these symptoms, the 30 symptoms that we mentioned, and doctors didn't believe her, and it's very difficult to test, and people are telling her or him it's in your head. You know, imagine how they feel, because they know that they're in pain. You know, they know that they can't work. They know that they can't get out of bed sometimes for days and weeks. I have a friend I met through the Lyme world, and we became very good social media friends. And she has a job that's a very professional job. And I asked her a question, and she said, well, I really can't do that because I'm in bed 80% of the time. And I said, you're in bed 80% of the time. You didn't let me know that. She says she worked things out with her job. This is before even the pandemic, where she was able to do everything from home, and they supported her. But, you know, if you have chronic Lyme disease, you're going through challenges. There's that adage, when you have your health, you could do a million things. When you don't have your health, you can only think of one thing. Reduce the stress as best as you can. You know, I say encourage positivity. You know, you can't be Pollyannish, right? You know, you can't say, hey, you're doing great, fight through it. It's a very, very difficult disease. I've heard from thousands of people to quote unquote fight through. It takes time. You know, there's no such thing as a magic bullet or a silver bullet. I see people post things. I found the cure to Lyme. Ain't no cure to Lyme that's going to take place over the course of a weekend. You're going to help your symptoms. You're going to find some things that are going to bring ease. You're going to find some things that are going to help you from a mental perspective. But it's not this type of a thing like I use for the broken ankle analogy, where you put in a cast for 6 weeks, you do some rehab for 2 weeks, and then you're fine. Be supportive, but understand that how you're supportive is going to require flexibility, and ask the person, you know, what do you need? You know, what do you need from me right now? Helping with daily life. I mean, uh, do the dishes. You know, if you're a parent, you may have to, if you're the man in the house or the woman who's managing someone with chronic Lyme disease or helping somebody with chronic Lyme, you know, you may be the person who's going to the parent teacher association meetings, and you may be the person who's going to the sport games. Understand that the other person, the Lyme survivor, is not going to like that, but you're going to have to step up and do those types of things. Fatigue is something, you know, at the end of the day, if I had a busy day, again, I work really hard, I travel, I do a lot of meetings. 6 o'clock, I'm done the day. I come home, make myself some dinner. Maybe I don't watch a whole lot of TV, but maybe I'll sit in front of the TV and just kind of, whew. Well, I've heard the fatigue that comes with Lyme disease, chronic Lyme. It's not something that's eased into at night. Sometimes, you know, it might take you 3-4 days in bed, you know, to kind of make it through. And even then, you may not be okay. So do what you can do to ease the stress. Like I mentioned before about family dynamics, you know, you also need to talk about it too. Communication in general is hard. making it through the day, especially coming out of the last 4 years that we've come out of, and everything politically and socially and things that are going around the world. You got to talk about what needs to be done to ensure that the family unit continues. And like I mentioned, parenting with Lyme, I was shocked to find this. I've made so many friends who are mothers of teenagers with chronic Lyme disease, and these are, uh, these are children who miss years of school, who had to be homeschooled and they can't get out of bed during their junior and senior year, and had all those social challenges related to that as well. So, be conscious of that. Uh, when I first realized that I needed to discover more about what Lyme survivors were going through, I went to the internet and I typed in chronic Lyme partner. And Bill, when you type in best pizza in Pittsburgh, a million pages come up on Google. Well, I typed in chronic Lyme partner and one article came up from 2014. And it was someone talking about how guilty they were. They were a horrible sister, mother, partner, spouse, friend, coworker, parent, whatever it might be. And I've heard that time and time again from people who are guilty that they have limitations and they're not able to be as fully livened as they would like to be. Lyme advocacy. So for the chronic Lyme partners out there, I didn't know that Lyme was a political disease. There's no association for the improvement of broken ankle survivors. You type in broken ankle support on Facebook or social media, nothing comes up. Lyme disease, there's an organization called the Center for Lyme Action. Their job is to increase funding, federal funding for Lyme disease related support. The cancer industry gets $50 billion a year from the federal government for testing and care and support and treatment. The Lyme disease funding is approaching 200 million. And as late as 4 years ago, it was in the, if not the single digits, in the early double digits. There's a lot of work being done by entities like Center for Lyme Action. I mentioned LymeDisease.org, Global Lyme Alliance, Partner in Lyme, Project Lyme. There's so many different entities out there that are trying to make it easier to get the healthcare and to spread the word that needs to be spread. And Pennsylvania Lyme Resource Network is one of those entities doing great work about that. I didn't know that there was a term called Lyme literate doctor, LLMD. And this is one of the problems. People will go to their GP or their infectious disease doctor or their family doctor with these symptoms. And if they're not fully aware of Lyme disease and what it might present, they'll say you have arthritis or you have some type of flu. Go take some Tylenol and you'll be fine, or go rest it off, or there's something going around, whatever it might be. There's a entity called LLMD, Lyme Literate Medical Doctor, and they are ones that focus 100%. They might be integrative medicine, they might be functional medicine, they may be infectious disease, they may be a GP or family medicine, but they go through a certification process to understand that. And there aren't a whole lot of them. Eric mentioned in the beginning that there may not be too many in various parts of Pennsylvania, but you need to seek them out. Many mainstream doctors just don't know how to treat Lyme. The good ones are trying to learn. And Eric mentioned ILADS before. Their mission is to teach doctors more about treating for Lyme disease. One of the cool things that I met a whole bunch of people who had Lyme and then committed themselves to the mission of supporting people. And there's probably a large number of people here in the Pennsylvania Lyme Resource Network who have reached the point where they're giving back. I met so many amazing people who were volunteering at the event back in April in Hershey. And there's a lot of people like that. They're doing podcasts or creating 501Cs. I did a podcast. I run a sales podcast as well called Sales Game Changers. And these three people have been through Lyme, and now they're associating themselves with giving back and educating, like the people who are involved with the Pennsylvania Lyme Resource Network. One of the last things I want to talk about is mental health, and we kind of touched on this a couple different ways. It's tough as it is, just getting through the day, especially with everything that's been going on in the world and continues to go on in the world. And things are more expensive, and climate change and whatever is out there. Lyme disease is a challenging mental health disease. As a matter of fact, every quarter, I bring on the CEO of the Global Lyme Alliance onto the Love Hope Lyme podcast. Her name is Laura McNeil. The very first time I had her on the show, I said, "What do you want to talk about?" She goes, "I want to talk about advancements in diagnostics, advancements in treatment, and advancements in mental health." So if you're a supporter of someone, be aware that this causes a severe amount of anxiety, depression, and sadness. So as a chronic Lyme supporter, someone who's has someone in your life, family member, friend, partner, neighbor, coworker, whatever it is, um, understand that this is a disease that requires a lot of resilience. Um, I've met people who have been fine. The word is remission for decades. And then something happens, a car crash, a dog bite. I met someone who was bitten by a dog, and then all of a sudden the Lyme started flaring, and she had mental and physical flares. COVID. I'm not going to mention other things that may cause some political issues, and there's a lot of other controversial things that I just don't get into, conspiratorial things, but they're out there as well. Everything you could do to help your loved one move forward is going to make a difference. And final thoughts. And again, I want to thank Eric and Bill and other people I'm friends with and the people who've read my book. Once again, the book is available on Amazon. Signed copies are available. Just connect to me via Facebook. The PDF is always free from day one. Like I mentioned, I've given out over 1,500. Today I gave out 3. I'm happy to give out PDFs of the Love Hope Lyme book to anybody with chronic Lyme who asks. The podcast, we publish it every 2 weeks, up to episode, I think 38 or 37. It's on YouTube. Just search Love Hope Lyme, and on Amazon as well. A couple quick things. Just understand that this is a real disease. This isn't in your head. This isn't fake. Even if you type into the internet, does chronic Lyme exist? It is real. Some people estimate that up to 1/7 of the planet may have some degree of tick-borne bacteria in them. You need to be empathetic. You need to be aware of what might be going on. Every Lyme journey is unique, like I mentioned. The treatment that may be required, what the person's able to do. I had a friend whose wife has Lyme disease, and he wanted to treat her to a trip. So he organized on his own, without telling her, this amazing trip to Hawaii. And she was livid, his spouse with Lyme disease, because she knew all the preparations that she would need to have to do to fly to Hawaii and take care of herself, during the 2 weeks that we're going to be there. Keep learning. There's a lot of great resources out there. There's more and more education popping out there, and together you can manage the challenges. So again, I want to thank Eric. I want to thank Bill. I'll go back to the first slide here, and we can open it up if you'd like to questions. Do you want me to unshare this, by the way?
It's up to you. Yeah, it doesn't matter. You can leave it up if you'd like to.
Okay.
So if anybody has questions right now, just leave them in either in the chat or in the you should see a Q&A option in Zoom, or if you're on Facebook, if you just want to post a comment,
I'll just stop the share.
I'll be watching for those.
While questions come in, everything you said really is spot on. And the one thing that I would kind of point to, which is a silver lining, if there is such a thing, is for all the people that I've met that have gotten Lyme disease, there is a small percentage that wants to do something to make sure nobody else goes through that. I will hit my share screen as well. And what you're looking at is these are the regional leaders that attended the patient conference that PA Lyme held at Hershey Lodge. And, most every one of these people either have Lyme themselves or their children have it. And so, when a door shuts, a window opens. And one of the things that I've learned and appreciated is working with committed people that are passionate, committed, really selfless in terms of wanting to help others. I mean, you see Bill Moore in the lower right-hand corner there, that there's no payoff to do this other than wanting to help others. So in a very odd way, an analogy that I use is, you know, if you're in war and in a battle and you're in a foxhole, you know, the person next to you could be a different race, a different religion, a different ethnicity, a different part of the country, but you're all in the same battle together. And there really is a bond of brotherhood amongst the Lyme patients because we all have been through the same thing. When I will go out, it's funny, and you said this, and it's true, and I'll speak for myself, that my friends didn't realize how ill I was because when I was sick for weeks and months, I wouldn't go out. But the one day that I did feel good, that I would go out, everybody would say, "Oh, you look fine, you look good." So there's a little bit of an imposter syndrome when you have Lyme, that you put your best face forward, and when you're not feeling well, you isolate. And what I've learned is with the community of Lyme volunteers, you know, they just are putting it all aside and they're wanting to help others. So, and really, Fred, it's kind of like what you're doing. You're not a Lyme survivor, but you are a Lyme survivor because it impacted your family. And knowing that you wanted to do something and make a difference. So it's a very special community, the folks that are in the Lyme world that work together.
Yeah, I've met people all over the world who are devoting energies, like I mentioned on that one slide. And I just want to acknowledge once again the Pennsylvania Lyme Resource Network and the people who participated, who I met at the conference. Like you said, this is there's a need, and giving somebody hope. You know, I originally was going to call the book "Love, Loss, Lyme." It was illiterate, and I thought it made sense. And I realized that this is a community that everyone has suffered some degree of loss, and loss of livelihood, obviously loss of health, loss of relationship. So I said, you know what, I'm going to try to provide some hope to a community that desperately needs it. So I just want to acknowledge once again you and Bill, and uh, I'm friends with some of your other volunteers. Anne has become a good friend of mine. Just to acknowledge you for the work that you're doing to try to improve somebody's life.
So a sad statistic in your presentation that 75% of committed relationships will terminate. That's pretty sad. So I'm gonna, after this, go thank my wife for sticking with me through those tough years, and she was very supportive to me. But you know, she did have to put up with. I did have a lot of emotional issues when I was very ill, a lot of anger issues and things like that. So that's
Yeah. Yeah, I can understand the pain that y'all went through. And yeah, when I heard that stat, I was like, seriously? Like, that's a thing. And I heard from so many people. Matter of fact, I interviewed someone on my podcast who said, with Lyme disease, she has chronic Lyme. She said, I did everything I could to push my husband away. She said, he was a great guy. I did everything possible to push him away. And she said, luckily he didn't go. So yeah, it's hard, and appreciate what you just said.
Fred, we're not
so.
so much getting questions, and maybe you are on Facebook Live, Bill, but the comments we're getting are thanking you for a wonderful presentation and thanking you for being the supportive person you are. And this one individual went 18 years with no correct diagnosis, 25 doctors, 5 infectious disease doctors, and still the misdiagnosis and lack of diagnosis. So, you know, your efforts are shining a light in a much needed, it's a small area, but it's a much needed area that you're shining a light in.
Thanks.
I've gotten a couple of text questions, folks in the Harrisburg region tend to text me with questions. And the one is, and I'll try to say it in a simplified manner, that um, the they believe that, you know, the divergence between the healthcare policies for Lyme largely stem from the Infectious Disease Society of America creating guidelines that, if you look at Under Our Skin documentary, or you look at the Quiet Epidemic documentary, or you read some of the books, you recognize that the infectious disease doctors that came up with the guidelines that for Lyme disease had conflicts of interest. And those conflicts of interest then bled into CDC policy. And so the question that I'm getting is, would he have any interest in going down the route of trying to get underneath the politicization of Lyme disease, and maybe become an advocate for change kind of at a bureaucratic level? Have you ever thought of using your, you know, soapbox for something like that?
So thank you for that question, person in Harrisburg. Uh, I 3 years ago, I never even remotely thought that, and as I was giving this presentation, I was just mind blown that I knew as much as I do about this. I want to give people the example of that. And actually, what you just said is 100% correct. Uh, 3 years ago, when this started, uh, my sister has a very good friend who's a infectious disease doctor. And I communicated to my sister what was going on, and my sister communicated to her infectious disease doctor friend, who I've known since high school, who's a lovely person, a great doctor, etc. And let's just call her Sue. Sue said to my sister, "Gee, you know that chronic Lyme disease doesn't exist. So what Fred is experiencing right now doesn't really happen." And all of a sudden, I had people who were saying to me, "Chronic Lyme doesn't exist, so you're wasting your time, trying to understand what's going on here." A year later, her friend, who's the doctor, said to my sister, It's not that it doesn't exist. We know that patients, and I don't like to use the word patient, I use the word Lyme disease, Lyme survivor, that we know that there's something going on." She said, "The problem is we can't really test for it. And if we can't test for it, we really don't know how to treat it." And that is one of the bigger challenges that are faced there as well. It's the fact that diagnostics are so poor. And again, if you're a doctor, I've had two sides of the medical industry. One is the whole concept of the gaslighting doctor. We even did a show on gaslighting, where a doctor dismisses your symptoms and puts the blame on you. There was a study that came out from Lamar University that talked about, they interviewed 1,000 Lyme survivors and talked about why so many of them were gaslit. And then there's those who, are empathetic. You had Dr. Amy Offit as your keynote speaker back at the patient conference, and she's remarkably empathetic about what patients might be going through. It's not that I'm sympathetic towards doctors, but a lot of doctors are practitioners. It's the old, if you give somebody a hammer, every problem is a nail, right? Type of a thing. It needs to change, though, because of the millions of chronic Lyme survivors that aren't getting properly diagnosed, and then they're being dismissed and gaslit because of that. So I encourage people to watch like documentaries. You mentioned the Quiet Epidemic. It's a great publication. There's a lot of work being done. For people who don't know, the actor Christopher Maloney from Law and Order has a family member with Lyme, and he's gone on Capitol Hill with various people, including Tommy Hilfiger's daughter, Allie Hilfiger, who is also an advocate as well. So I'm doing the best I can, and there's a lot of work to be done.
We did get one question from Facebook. Uh, was there a moment or specific information you read that clicked for you, helped to motivate you to finally learn everything you could?
Yeah. Someone who was very close to me uh, chose to heal from chronic Lyme disease on their own. So I was taken aback. I didn't expect it. And I said, I need to figure out more about this chronic Lyme disease. So it hits people personally. It's one of those things that I never foresaw. Matter of fact, I'll share something with you as well. I've gotten clients. I'll tell you one story. I've gotten clients. My clients are VPs of sales at companies with large business to business sales organizations, companies like Amazon, Hilton, Oracle Software. I started, that article I posted on LymeDisease.org, I started posting on Facebook when I realized that I didn't know, I knew 5% of what there is to know. I wanted other people to understand more and more about this disease. So I freely publish on Facebook and LinkedIn. I was at an event a year and a half ago. It was in March of 2023. I live in Northern Virginia, right near Tyson's Corner, Reston, that area. I was at an industry event at a very popular hotel. And there was a guy who used to be a customer of mine. And he was a VP of sales for a company. And he was on the other side of the lobby. And I saw him and gave him a wave. And I expected that was going to be it, just a wave. And he started walking towards me. And I was like, okay, something's going on here. He came up to me and he said, I see that you're posting on Facebook and LinkedIn. We happen to be Facebook friends as well, about Lyme disease. He said, what's the story? And I gave him a 2-minute synopsis of why I gotten committed to this. And he said, well, you don't know this, but my 32-year-old son has chronic Lyme disease. He hasn't left the house in 3 years. He was an athlete. He can't do any sports anymore. He can't work. His anxiety is through the roof. And I said to him, well, have you tried X? Well, we tried that, but blah, blah, blah. And he asked me if I was familiar with a particular doctor. And I said, yeah, I've heard good things about this particular doctor. And for about 30 minutes, we had probably the most authentic conversation I've had in the business setting. A lot of times in business, you're thinking about what do you need to say next to move the business forward. And it was just the most authentic conversation that we ever had. And then 40 minutes into the conversation, he said, all right, well, what's the latest with the Institute for Excellence in Sales? And I said, well, we're doing this, and the other thing. And he said, well, maybe it's time that we rejoined. My customers joined the Institute. We had a Zoom call 2 weeks later, and then a month later, they became a partner again. And I tell people, 3 years ago, I didn't sit down and say, all right, I'm going to find a mysterious disease that people might not know anything about, and I'm going to write a book in order to get someone who might be tied to it. But, just you meet people who were affected by Lyme, right? And I mentioned in the very beginning, I had a customer whose sister-in-law's daughter, or whatever it was, somebody knows somebody, right? Somebody knows somebody at work. I've had so many people who've come up to me and said, oh yeah, I used to work with a guy who can't work anymore because he had Lyme disease. And then I'll meet somebody who's like, yeah, my sister-in-law's daughter, or, oh yeah, we have a neighbor. I've gone to sales conferences where I wrote another book called Insights for Sales Game Changers for salespeople. I'll put that book on the table to sell and sign. And then I'll have a couple copies of Lyme, Love, Hope, Lyme. Almost invariably, I'll get 2 to 5 people who will say, what is this? And then I tell them the story about why I wrote the book and the podcast. And then there's somebody who is in every world, and they're all across the country. People think that Lyme is New England and maybe Hudson Valley and central Pennsylvania. I've spoken to people in not just around the world, but Texas. A lot of people have gotten afflicted from Lyme in the Ozarks, in Missouri, Wisconsin, Kentucky, Florida. I spoke to 2 people today from Florida. So it's not going to go away tomorrow. We need to continue to advocate and educate the world.
All right. We've not gotten any more questions, but we did get another thank you from someone who's had Lyme for decades, but only diagnosed in recent years. And she says during this webinar, she's had profound realizations about life. So I've thought back through the years. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow. You're welcome.
You had said, Fred, about the full moon and the the sequencing of Lyme patients that they flare around the full moon. About 2 hours before we started today, the woman who started Harrisburg Lyme texted me and said, I'm not going to be on tonight. Full moon's tonight at 10:25. I don't know if you know. But she texted me about 3 hours prior to this starting saying, I'm not going to be able to make it. Thankfully, it will be recorded. So yeah, that is definitely a real world event. I do appreciate what you said about the authentic nature of that conversation. When I see my old friends, whether it's from sports or from college or from an old neighborhood or association or whatever, the conversations are topical, good conversations, nothing wrong with them, but conversations with other Lyme survivors is really, no, really, how are you doing? No, really, what's going on with you these days? And you can really get to the heart of the matter with that community. So in a weird way, there is somewhat of a silver lining to it. So you mentioned it, and I'll use this as just to let everyone know, our virtual Lyme impact session for October will be October 15th, and it's going to be Dr. Joseph Burrascano. And it is going to be on the nature of Lyme testing, just the confusing state of Lyme tests and what you need to know. You know, PCR, antibody, you know, is it organic tests? What types of tests are there? It seems like there's more and more breakthroughs lately. For those of you that may not be aware of it, IGeneX has a sister corporation, AccuDart, and they are releasing a home test kit. And I believe it's available now. I believe you can go online. And for $149, it is a test for Borrelia burgdorferi, Lyme, but also for a total package of, I believe, $495, Lyme, Babesia bartonella, and Borrelia myomoti, tick-borne relapse fever. So there are more and more breakthroughs in the Lyme testing area. For those that are not familiar, Dr. Burrascano is one of the elder statesmen in the Lyme disease movement. He was one of the first practitioners that became Lyme literate and really kind of set the tone of what the science and research should be. And that really helped to create the infrastructure for ILADS to do what they're doing from a science and a research point of view. So we're looking forward to that in October. So Mr. Moore, any last words of wisdom before we call it a day?
No, I think we've covered it.
Okay. And Mr. Diamond, anything else you'd like to end on?
Yeah, just interestingly, the section on the full moon in my book was based on some of the research from Dr. Burrascano. And just want to acknowledge once again you and Bill and all the people who are on that volunteer for the work that you're doing. You know, it's a disease. I'm sorry, it's a community in need of hope and peace. So everything that everybody here is doing is contributing to quality of life. And I just want to acknowledge everybody who is participating.
Yeah. Well, thank you for what you're doing. We do appreciate it. So with that,
Thank
we'll
you,
call
Fred.
it an evening and good night. And this will be recorded. It'll be on our website and it'll be on our YouTube channel. So goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Facebook as well. It'll be on Facebook.
On
Yeah.
Facebook as well.
Okay. Good
Thank
night.
you. See you, Fred.